So section 9.3 is where we're going to start solving quadratic equations, and the first type we're going to solve it by is by graphing. So it's asking you what are the solutions and then use a graph of the related function. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Desmos to graph it, and then we're going to analyze where that graph crosses the x-axis. Where your graph crosses the x-axis is your answer. So I came over here and I'm looking at my graph for Desmos. So here's my graph. I'm wanting to find where it crosses the x-axis. So once you have typed in that left side of your equal sign, so x squared minus 1, you should be getting 2 points that cross the x-axis. And so in this case, my answer would be those two x coordinates. So I would write down my answer as 1 and -1. So then I would do the same thing for the second one. I would come over to my graph, type in my equation, which in this case is just x squared, and then notice that I just have 1 point that my graph crosses, so my answer would just be 0. Then on the very last one, I have x squared plus 1. Notice that this graph does not cross the x-axis at all. So if it does not cross the x-axis at all, my answer would be no solution. So you have 3 types. You can get 2 answers, which in this first one, which was. You can get 1 answer where it crosses the x-axis just 1 time, and you can get no solution, which would mean that my parabola would never cross the x-axis. So pause the video and see if you can do the next ones. Okay, so for x squared minus 16, you should be getting 4 and -4 because it should be crossing at those 2 spots on the x-axis. On the next one, you should not be getting any answer because this will never cross the x-axis. And then on the very last one, I have just 0. Okay, so the first part is where you were solving by graphing. So remember, that's where it crosses the x-axis. Now we're going to switch gears and we're going to solve it by using a square root. Okay, so remember when we were solving equations, we had to draw a line down the middle, so you can go ahead and draw down the line. What we want to isolate is that x squared first, so we're going to work backwards. So we're going to add 5 first, or add 75 to both sides first, so that those 75's cancel. So that leaves me with 3x squared equaling 75. Then I want to still get x squared by itself, so I'm going to come back and divide by 3 since this means times. 75 divided by 3 is 25, so now I have x squared equal 25. Here's where we do the square root. So to get rid of a squared, we want to do the square root on both sides. So that will get rid of the squared on the x, so I just have x. And then here's the tricky part. The square root of 25, when you type that into your calculator, you will only get that positive 5. You have to keep in account that there are actually 2 numbers that I can square to get 25. So when I do the square root of a number, that means what number times itself is 25. So if that's the case, I could use positive 5 for both of those. Or remember that a negative times a negative is also positive 25. So you will have 2 answers if you can ever do the square root of that number. Alright, let's take a look at another one. So in the GOTA question, we have m squared minus 36 equals 0. See if you can solve that question by yourself. Okay, so in that first question, m squared minus 36 equals 0. I would first add 36 to both sides, and then I would have m squared equaling 36. To get rid of that squared, I would do the square root to both sides. So keep in mind I would have 2 answers in this case, so I would get 6 and also -6. Let's run through the next 2 together. So on the next one, I have 3x squared plus 15 equaling 0. So again, I want to isolate this x squared, so I'm going to move this plus 15 first. So I'm going to minus 15 to both sides. Then that means these 15 cancels out, so I have 3x squared equaling a negative 15. I'm going to divide both sides by 3, so now I have x squared equaling negative 5. Here's where you would want to do the square root of both sides. So on your calculator, I would be typing in the square root, which is second x squared, and then negative 5. Notice that it says domain error. You cannot do the square root of a negative. So every time you get an error, that means that there is a no solution. So I cannot do the square root of a negative 5 because this is a negative number. So you can only do square roots of the positives. Alright, let's run through one more. So on the last question, I have 4d squared plus 16 equals 16. So I would minus 16 from both sides, so that would leave me with 4d squared equaling 0. Then I would come back and divide by 4 on both sides, and then that would leave me with d squared equaling 0. I would do the square root, and this would be a case where you only just get 0. So 0 will never be positive and negative since 0 has no sign to it. So here is a case where you have one answer, here is a case where you have no solution, here is a case where you have two solutions. So if this is a positive whole number, this should end up with two answers. If this that you're square rooting is a negative number, should be no solution. And if you ever do the square root of 0, just 0, no positive and negative. Okay, today you were solving quadratics using graphing and by square roots.